how do we as researchers bridge that gap between people with needs to be served and the organizations who are trying to meet those needs sustainably? Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar will be covering ways to ensure that you're understanding the full picture around some tough to cover research and tough to cover topics. Due to the nature of this webinar, it was important to me that we coordinated with the experts who understand intersectionality. So today I'm pleased to be joined by expert researchers Mag of Clarteza and Paul of Marketing Analysts, who will introduce themselves in more detail in just a minute. But as your host, I will go first. My name is Kim Larson, pronoun she, her. I'm out on the West Coast, based out of Portland, Oregon. I'm a client success manager here at Luminoso. I've been in the experience management and analysis space for about 10 years so far, with the focus on text analytics for that later half. Before that, I studied developmental economics, including living abroad in Uganda for a bit. And I learned the importance of listening to stakeholders before directing changes that will impact those stakeholders. That is the core of what Mag and Paula do. Listen to people before you make changes that impact them. A few brief things about me now. I've adopted a strong appreciation for Tolkien, and I tend to show up to things with my service dog in training, Emmy here. Her favorite tasks are pressing crosswalk buttons. She's a big fan of that one, and closing doors. Currently a bit strongly, but we're working on it. Today we have a new face and a familiar one. Paula, our newest guest, would you introduce yourself first?
Hi, I'm Paula Nyfield from Marketing Analysts, and as we put this presentation together, Kim put that I was from Long Island, and I'm like, whoops, got to change that. About 2 weeks ago, we just moved to Connecticut to actually be near our new grandchild. So very exciting, just built a house and excited about that. But right after we moved in, I ran to Dominican Republic to do this yoga retreat. So I sort of left my husband high and dry to deal with the house while I could go do yoga in this beautiful environment. I have been a client advisor at Marketing Analysts for too many years to say, but but I really do love my job. Marketing Analyst is a great place to be, and I stay here because I always learn. I love the people I work with, but I'm always growing. And so that's really important to me in my job, because we're always meeting new challenges, and Marketing Analyst is always developing new techniques, and it's just fun to address all of these challenges. So that's me.
Thanks, Paula. Congrats on the house and the grandbaby, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And we have a familiar face, Mag. For those who haven't caught up with you since our last webinar on the power of emotions, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Mag Retelewski. I'm based in Chicago. I'm a president and founder of Clarteza. My team focuses on innovation. I have a personal, unwavering passion for understanding people. And when it comes to my team, one of the unique things about us is we fuse a variety of different methods to uncover the nuggets as well as the universal truth. So we might meld predictive AI, traditional qual and quant to uncover the insights. Not every question that we get from the client requires one particular method. So sometimes you might use multiple ones to get to the insights that you're looking for. On a personal level, I love to learn and love to acquire new skills. I crave experiences, as you can see on the picture. I love to travel with my family and explore the world. That is part of my inspiration when it comes to my innovative work that we do for our clients. In fact, I have a bucket list of over 100 things I'd like to do and accomplish, and I slowly check it off every year, which is really quite exciting. My latest accomplishments, and I'm really excited about those, Great Barrier Reef. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, there's an endangered species humphead wrasse named Napoleon, who's very friendly, just about 7 feet in size, so pretty ginormous, yes. Hanging out with koalas, playing with monkeys, and I crossed Australia to the other side of the of the land just to go to the Rottnest Islands to hang out with quokkas, which are deemed to be the happiest animals on Earth. So something to keep in mind. If you want to have that a little positive energy, go to Rottnest Islands, Australia, and have a selfie with the quokka. It will rub off, I promise. My latest passion, competitive ballroom dancing. So as you can see, we're all a little bit the same and different.
Yeah, so much fun and always good to connect with Mag. There's always stories from what Mag has done recently. Same thing with Paula. I'm finding out every call there's something new. It's really good to catch up with you guys. So thank you for joining us today. As Mag mentioned, across the three of us have a lot in common. The gender, ethnicity, industry, even eye color, as I was going through those pictures. And today we all decided to wear apparently very similar glasses. But we also have our differences, right? The issues we feel comfortable talking about will differ. The issues each of us consider to be taboo will differ. And how much detail or truth we're willing to disclose about sensitive personal topics may differ as well. So things to keep in mind as we go through these next things is we're all researchers and trying to figure out how do we understand people. Potentially sensitive topics will vary in difficulty to research. Are we researching something that may feel like a pretty safe topic that may be sensitive to some folks more than others? For example, health, fitness routines, food preferences, and cultural practices. Are there things that feel safe in some circles but not others, like travel, economic status, maybe something a little bit spicier like mental health, trauma, neurodivergence? What about intimate issues like personal hygiene, menopause, family dynamics, gender and orientation? Those are things that vary from the West Coast to the Midwest to the East Coast. Depends on the age group. Depending on the feedback and the dynamic between the respondents and the brand seeking the feedback, researchers are tasked with surfacing the truth about some pretty personal topics, despite challenges like taboo around a topic, mental or systemic resistance. Is there censorship or oversight on a platform that's hiding the story? Discrimination. Are there folks that are not allowed to the table that have relevant stories? Are we getting the full coverage of everybody that's relevant to the discussion? And bias. Are respondents pushed in a direction that doesn't reflect their experience? Is that because of the brand oversight? Is that because of the researcher? Are we covering the actual core truth? So how do we as researchers bridge that gap between people with needs to be served and the organizations who are trying to meet those needs sustainably? Today we'll cover the keys on delivering that valuable research by addressing and overcoming specific obstacles so that everyone's making the best decisions as researchers and as consumers of that research. We'll start with why. Why are we doing this study in the first place? Why is the research needed? What are we trying to solve? And what do we need to make informed decisions about? Research that isn't aligned with the objectives of the organization or the brand won't get funding and it won't make a difference. And that's not helpful for anybody. So in order to make the research meaningful, everyone has to be involved and on the same page about what needs to be solved. I recently worked with a team. They're launching a pilot project with one of their clients. I was copied on the email thread as they launched right into logistics about what questions would be asked. And in that exchange, the researcher received pretty explicit directions on what changes to make to the open-ended prompts. But the directions didn't align with the best practices for the new methodology, being text analytics AI. So instead of hashing it out via email, we set up a meeting to get on the same page with the stakeholder. And I made a deck to go over the objectives first, best practices second, and then the details. In those details, we covered who was going to be asked, when, what, the insights they could expect, and all that. And the outcome from that discussion was the approval for an expanded study that better aligned with best practices in the scope because we had buy-in for the big picture first. It wasn't about the study, it was about the problem, and that was key. Now, Mag and Paula have navigated these experiences and circumstances way more than I have. So let's start with Mag. How do you ensure that you get a clear understanding of your client's objectives?
So it's an interesting point, Kim, that you made, and it's important to know what the objective really is instead of projecting or assuming. While it may feel faster, sort of assume, okay, I think I know what is needed to be accomplished, it really isn't. It's important to question your own judgment in making those assumptions. So in this case, I would recommend to follow a protocol, or at least advocate for one. A reason for this is you want to understand what success is to them from a variety of different angles, variety of different perspectives. With that different point of view, you start building a picture, what it is that everybody is trying to accomplish with this study, because different stakeholders might have different need for their own data. They might want to look for something specific that they're going to use for their department. So the reason I follow this process is I had a situation, unfortunately, more than once, where the internal understanding of what needed to be done varied. In one case, we were told that stakeholder interviews were not necessary or deemed to be helpful, which is tricky to begin with. So we designed a study, completed 3 phases of that study, just to learn that the leadership team had no interest in pursuing the initiatives because they didn't have what they needed to focus on their goals, which is a miss. What's interesting about this, sharing a story like this preemptively, without judgment, when you're talking with somebody and designing a study, it might raise a red flag, and for them to start thinking, you know what, maybe I will add that element into the phase of the research, simply because I don't want to find myself in that situation down the road. So the stakeholder interviews, especially for bigger initiatives, are a must. And it's not only about the objective, but also you're gonna buy-in for the process, for the support, and especially for the projects that we tend to work in innovation. You do want that excitement and support when something is new and it feels different and it's a little risky for some. You want the champions along the way that will cheerlead you through the process.
It's super helpful. And shifting from the email thread to the face-to-face conversation, it was super helpful. Trying to do that interview online, it's a bit of a miss. The tone isn't there. Paula had mentioned there's a good list of questions that Paula goes over. Will you share some of those questions that you asked your clients in your interviews?
Sure. I also, when I get, let's say, an email request for an RFP, I'll always ask for just a conversation, because things, as people start talking, you surface more and more. And the more you understand, the better you can really design the research and then help analyze, and analyze it as well. So I obviously understanding the objectives from everybody's point of view, what stakeholders are involved in it and what do each of them want to get out of it. So a lot of times, if it's a big study, I'll sometimes say, just give me a laundry list of what you want to know. So as we're designing it, we can actually tick off, yes, we can answer this, that, and the next thing, and also think about the types of analyses that we're going to use to get to those answers, because it's not always a straight answer. So making sure that you have all the right questions built in as well. So understanding the objectives is really critical. But I also want to know what they already know, because a lot of times I'm not the first one to do research in this category for them. So I don't want to repeat what they already have done. So I will ask, what you know, can you send me some old reports or questionnaires that might help me really more understand where are you now and where do you need to go from here. And with a quantitative survey we're doing, a lot of times, let's say it's a concept test or something along those lines, I want to know, how do you measure success before we even go into the study? I want to know, what are the action standards, objective criteria that we are going to be assessing against, because I don't want to come out and say, oh, how do we want to define this? Well, this is how this did. So, and I like that concept. So this is what my action standards are. So we want to get the action standards up front as well. And finally, nobody likes to talk about it, but of course, budget. I always ask, what do you have to spend in this? Or just give me a ballpark figure, because I can design something that's $80,000, but if you only have $20,000, what's the use? So that's a critical question as well.
Yeah, can be huge because it also gives you a sense of how much are they prioritizing this information, right? Because if they're not willing to invest in doing it right the first time, that tells you how much they're willing to respond to it. And I liked your point about finding out what the audience or the brand knows about the topic already. Occasionally we'll get the request for like, well, surprise me with what's in my data. And that's a tricky line to dance on when you don't know what they know, because there could be a whole bunch of things that they know already. But if they don't know a bunch of things, it still needs to resonate as true. It's tricky. So getting that interview up front, super helpful. So now that we've had our discussion with our stakeholders, we've gone through the big list of questions. The next step that we tend to take on in the sales cycle is trying to build a rapport, right? Trying to build up that trust. And if we don't have a rapport already, there's a level of education around best practices and how they can adhere to them. As you guys are aware, not everyone has used a text analytics AI. So some of the things that we have to do is a bit of teaching on like how to ask open-ended questions. So an example that we've done in the past or are currently putting forward is the best practices for how to use our methodology when you're asking a ton of people at scale, standardizing the prompts for consistency if you're trying to compare two demographics, making sure that it's storyful feedback, that it has depth in topics and broad vocabulary, and that you're collecting the appropriate metadata, because the AI can't lie. It can't make things up. We're not a generative AI, we're a digestive AI. And making sure that the text is honest and reflective, that we're taking stakeholders where they need to go without putting them in a rabbit hole. After we get to this step, one of the things that can be helpful for folks who are maybe designing a study for the first time and it's really hard to come up with something from scratch, we'll give an example. This slide is the employee survey example, where we have a really short survey to understand how employees are doing, and we have a scored questions. I enjoy coming to work, a scale of very untrue to very true. And then the respondents get to choose an essay that feels safest and most interesting to them. We're not going to make them answer both because survey fatigue is real, and we want people to have a sense of choice. We want people to resonate and give us their best feedback. So in this case, we have, how do you altruistically help someone incorporate into the culture of where you are? Or alternatively, reflective. That can be very comforting to reflect on your experiences. Mag, how does your team address challenges like survey fatigue?
So it's an important issue that you really need to keep in mind as you're asking the respondent variety of different questions. But essentially, make the survey enjoyable to take as much as possible. And importantly, assure the respondents that their feedback is valued and it matters.
Super helpful. And one of the things that we may come across, depending on the topic that we're trying to study, you guys both know, and we touched on this earlier, I have like two interests, right? I like my dogs and I like nerd stuff. So trying to get me to care about like packaging of something that I'm going to buy once, I'm be like, it's fine. I can see there's moss in the bag. How do you navigate getting information on things that maybe people don't necessarily feel super passionate and storyful about here?
So it's really important to pick the right sample, to get the right sample. You don't want to go too narrow and just talk to your super extreme lovers or something along those lines, but you also don't want to go to people who have no interest in the category whatsoever. So this is a conversation that I have with my clients with every study to really make sure that we get the right respondents in the study. So that's a very critical step, and it's something that we talk about a lot because everybody has different philosophies. And so I also don't want to do quota samples where we get a third of these groups and then just put them all together if that's not how they are in the real population. Because if I just throw these together, what is that group? What is that aggregate? So I'm usually a proponent of a random sample and then augmenting so that I can read different subgroups. There are, sometimes that doesn't work, but that's my preference if we can. I want a sample that's representative of a real population out there. So that's really critical. And logistically, sample is very tricky right now with all the online panels. And so what we do as best practices is we make sure that we go across a variety of different panels, because every panel has a different way of recruiting, has a different way of maintaining people, etc. That I find that qualitatively panels are different. An 18 to 24-year-old female on one panel is not necessarily like an 18 to 24-year-old female on another panel. So we want to go across panels, but then within each panel, we want to get a representative sample. I don't want to say, okay, we'll go to 4 panels, but we're going to get our younger consumers from this panel and our older consumers from that panel. You know, and here's an example of when that wasn't done well and what a nightmare created for a client. We took over a tracking study. It was the 4th year of the tracking study. We said, okay, we're going to have the old supplier do the wave this year, and we're going to do 600 respondents, and we're going to compare our results to make sure that transitioning over, that we were able to get the same results, so that moving forward, it's trended correctly. They gave us the panel profiles, they gave us the demographics, they gave us all these criteria to match, and we did. The other supplier had a more difficult time with some of the panel, so the client said, okay, you could loosen up who you get the sample from. When we got it back, a lot matched up between our study and this other supplier's study, but critical measures unfortunately didn't, like client awareness, you know, interest or importance of the category, you know, things along those lines. So we started digging into this. And what we ended up finding out is that panel means so much. And the first year, they only went with 1 panel. The second year, they went with 2 panels and split it half and half. The third year, they did something else. And the 4th year, they did something else. It ended up being a nightmare. And what the client ended up having to do was drop out the first 2 years of data. And then we had to wait the 3rd year of data. And we're in the processing of it right now. And we're hoping that nothing of the recommendations they made last year, now that we wait the data, still hold. So you have to be really, really careful on sample, and we watch it extremely carefully. Quality of sample varies, and sample controls from supplier to supplier vary. And, you know, better sample costs more money.
So Paula, this is great because you know, talking to the right people is essential, and you need to have the right mix for sure. That's one and a very important part of the equation that you need to have it right. The other one is you want to make sure that you ask the question in the right way. You need to understand why people do what they do, right? Not just, you know, here's the result of what they do, but why do they do it? So our goal is to look for problem in driver pairing. So why, you know, somebody decides to pick up that package from the shelf versus another. And it's the difference between really saying, how do you feel about buying this dog food, as Kim showed, to what does your dog's health mean to you? Right? Mm-hmm. How do you choose the package, and why do you choose the package? And, you know, I've had an example of a situation we do with innovation type work, sometimes get into the situation where we have to help redesign the package. So you want to make sure that you highlight the elements that really matter to the consumer. If flavor is one of the elements that really is the driver for you, you want to make sure it's there, number one, and number two, it's visible. So one of the elements with predictive AI type techniques, we do use that solution to be able to not only make sure that the element that matters to the consumer is shown and highlighted, but it also is visible on the package. As there were situations that we've had with a client where they decided to subjectively make a decision and redesign the package. There was a group of people in the room that that decided to move with that particular package design because that's just what they liked and preferred. What ended up unfortunately happening is they had to pull the product off the shelves because the consumers were really unhappy because it was one of the most important drivers for that purchase. was not visible for them. So they had to work to find the product that they were looking for. And that's not what you want for your consumers.
No, not when we have attention spans the way we do. And I think one of the things that Mag has touched on previously is, like, so we're bridging the details of the question using packaging as our go-to example, right? So we've separated the discussion of the physical thing to more of an identity piece. Like, I am a service dog handler. That is it's a pretty intimate thing on the spectrum of packaging discussions, right? So when we start to get into that level of identity and disclosure, how do I know that it is safe to disclose some of these full stories? How do I let my guard down to be transparent with an anonymous big survey?
Yeah. And it's all about making it safe. For example, you want to reassure your audience the survey is anonymous. For sensitive topics, people may feel uncomfortable, or worse, they may fear retaliation. It can be difficult to give constructive or critical feedback to begin with, whether it's face-to-face or, online, if it's linked to your name. And in this particular case, let's consider surveys that are linked, in fact, to your name and email address. In my kids' school district, for example, I recently found out that there was a survey about psychological safety in sports. Pretty big topic, linked to email address and the name of the person that was taking that survey. Among many questions, the survey asked if a student athlete felt comfortable saying no to a coach when they felt they were pushed too hard in their respective sports. That's a vulnerable in question and uncomfortable. My kids quickly figured out that they cannot be honest. Unfortunately, this is too bad, because it was an important question that the school could really gain a lot out of that question. But the fact that it was linked to the name, linked to the email address, they said if their coach reads their answers, he might reassign them to a lower level position in their team. That was a deterrent for them. So they played it safe. They didn't really say how they felt, which is a missed opportunity.
Anonymity is really critical. And when we do quant studies, we let people know that their answers are only going to be read in aggregate, and that we are looking at making sure that we are collecting from diverse communities, but that it's never going to be linked just to them. So, we make sure about that as well. And then as we're asking more sensitive questions, what we do is we try to warm people up and ease them into it. So we don't just hit them off the bat with, asking them something that's very uncomfortable. Also, if we are more matter of fact about it and we are professional about it and, speak their language, that's another way to get them more comfortable to answer truthfully. Using projective techniques is another way. What we had a very sensitive topic on a feminine hygiene product, and we were trying to ask them about a vaginally conscious moment. As you could imagine, that is a quite sensitive question. But what we did was matter of fact, we explained what we meant by this, and then got them into answering the survey. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll ask them in a softer approach. We'll start broader until we can get into really where we're trying to get to, just to warm them up.
So it's a good point on the mentioning in the survey that they are part of a diverse panel. If I was just asked specifically about something like service dog access or something, I may be more limited in my feedback. Whereas if I know I'm part of a diverse pool and there may not be others like me in that pool, I'm more likely to share more because I feel like I'm representing my community.
Super helpful. And you touched upon, having an easygoing, friendly language and finding the connection through that is really quite important. In the survey, you can use an informal type language sometimes, and that can break the barrier and make you feel that you're talking to a friend on the other side. That it's exciting when people tend to get to that section, because we say, now we have a request that will take you 5 minutes, or wait, maybe 8. It depends on how you approach it, right? So having a playful, informal type questions may make the respondent feel at ease as well. The other one is ask them to share stories. And my goal is always to look to establish that positive state of mind. Something like describe the time you were on vacation and you had to use X, Y, and Z, the product or service. Imagine you're a store owner and you had to increase your revenue within a week. Sort of a playful, interesting, projective type questions that can unlock the imagination and that ease that you're looking for.
When we're asking open ends, a lot of times we'll ask a laddering approach. And we'll just say, what are the top 3 things you think about? Just give us a couple of words or phrases. And then what we do is we use their own language and give it back to them and say, can you explain this more? But we'll then say, think about who you were with, where you were, give them a lot of different cues to really bring them back to that time to remember it. And we use also sensory cues. For instance, if we're doing a restaurant, think about the aromas, noise, the ambiance, so on and so forth. Anything to get them to feel it more and remember it better. So that's really important. I don't want to give people what I want them to say. I want them to tell me what they want to say. In fact, we use this a lot even for generating closed-ended lists for subsequent surveys, because you don't know what you don't know and you don't know what to ask. So as we mine a lot of these open ends, things will come up and say, oh, that's how they talk about it, or we missed that point, kind of thing. In fact, when we were doing a paper towel study, we asked about lint, but we didn't ask specifically about lint on mirrors. And that was a whole other branch of what was important to them. And we didn't know that until we went through the open ends. Mm-hmm. So the wording of the questions is very important, as is the sequence. You have to be careful. Whatever you ask first and they start thinking about is going to influence what they answer later. So when designing the survey, you have to really think about, what do you need your cleanest responses on and what is going to be least biasing for future questions. And then also just trying to keep scaling consistent so you don't have positives on one side of the scale and then change it to negatives on another question. So you have to be careful there too.
Yeah, and the point you made about giving people's words back to them later in the survey, that's really reflective of active listening that people tend to have conversationally. So it's really nice to see that in a survey where that's scaled out and you need I would call it the brain soup that Mag talks about pretty regularly, the different brain chemicals that we get when going through an experience.
It makes you feel understood, right? I mean, and that's a connection level that is really unparalleled. It makes you feel good. It's the oxytocin, Kim, that I was mentioning. That's just, the make you feel good about, creating a new connection. So if you can do that, whether it's through online quantitative or qualitative study, it really is quite an experience for both parties involved. The other thing that you want to consider is you think about the experience that you create for that respondent. We strive to create surveys that induce cognitive ease by being flawless or frictionless or relatively easy. And it believe me, it's not always easy. Especially for some of the more complicated study design where you have a long list of questions you need to ask. But it is important and helpful to establish expectations on why it might take longer. Give the respondent the honest reason why it matters, because their opinion does matter. They matter to the brands that we work with, because they might change the trajectory of how might the product or service look like at the end of the day. So reiterating that element might be really quite helpful. Also, in the middle of the study, again, if you have a long one, add some breathers. Don't always have long lists of attributes and questions that somebody really has to think about how they felt. Sprinkle in easy questions or even surprising one. That element of excitement, oh, okay, now they're being playful again. allows the respondent to feel that they were surprised, they were doing something joyful. Again, it has that element of dopamine release. It's the chemical in your brain that's responsible for motivation, for drive, for making you feel good. And it's also released when you are engaged in something novel or surprising. So again, think of a relationship you're building. Often people think about, oh, respondent is anonymous on the other side, they don't know. There is a human being behind that, and establishing that relationship and treating them the right way really can make a difference and influence the insights you might uncover down the road.
Yeah, and given the first step where we're discussing the objectives with the brands, and we know that they're invested and they're getting buy-in because they want to make a change and they want to make a difference and they want to make things right, the respondents should know that and know that they're a part of something that is going to improve the quality of life in general, versus if the internal stakeholders, it's like it's a to-do list task that we do this research because organizations do research for checklist reasons. I think the respondents and the people, they're going to get a sense of that too. So recognizing that, and now that we're on the best practices track, we know that our research is going to make a difference. We know how it's going to make a difference. It's safe, it's storyful. As the researchers, you've just funneled yourself into a lot of work, because we're asking hundreds and hundreds of respondents to tell their most storyful and intimate stories in the safest ways to solve some really big issues. How do you navigate all of that? And honestly, and
reading and coding those open ends, the way that we're asking the questions now, it's impossible to read it and code it, manually. It's just, if you want to get that rich information. So really, the Luminoso platform is really, I love using it, I have to say. It really, what it does is it organizes the data for us so that we can then pick it up after it's organized. And so we could see what themes, what words, what phrases are all coming out on the map. And it's sort of, it's organized for us. And then we could go in and start analyzing it as humans. We get the maps, but now it's our job to take it and bring it to the insights. And so, but you never lose the context of the verbatims, because I can go back and ask the map questions. Well, what does that mean? What does that word or phrase mean? So I click on it and I can actually hear consumers talk in a way. It's text, but I can read it and really get the context through it. To me, it's so far beyond where you could be with coding. And but anyway, and what we can also do with this type of methodology is we could then add it to our drivers analyses that we do, and we can identify drivers, and then we can identify how the different words, phrases, the communication elements link. So it's such a rich analysis that you get that you couldn't get without these types of maps.
So
you're welcome.
So the high value, the variety covers a whole bunch of things. Like you can cover a bunch of topics. They can talk about all the different dimensions of it, the different sources of data, and all of that's important if you have that baseline of being able to handle it responsibly and with integrity, because those insights matter, right? We need to guarantee to the brands that this feedback matters, to the respondents the feedback matters. There's a lot of responsibility on the researchers to manage that responsibly and uphold the truth there. So, and that ties into the values of a successful research agency and a successful brand, right? Doing the right thing with the data you have, not punishing people who gave adversarial feedback, because you never know when an extra step for inclusivity is going to impact everyone else. We've talked about in previous webinars with the marketing analysts team, the curb cuts. Right? It improves accessibility for a demographic, but it improves accessibility for a whole bunch of demographics. So being honest with those findings, being thorough and intentional about the research processes, communication across the board. This whole game is about communication, right? How are you communicating with brands? How are the brands communicating with you? How are you communicating with the external respondents? How are they communicating back to you? And then how are you translating that back meaningfully back to the brands? And all of that requires a level of investment in time, in methodology, in technology, in thinking about the different ways to research things. It's not a light lift. And so when we can make it lighter wherever we can, that allows you to invest more in the more strategic things. So I'm sure all of this is obvious to everyone, but we have to say it out loud because it needs to be intentional, right? Shortcuts can appear at any one of the steps of the cycle, and those have consequences. And maybe it's just me, but I hate consequences. I'm not a fan, right? Like I want to be able to have the whole best thing. So I'm really glad we get to use it. So in summary, how do we start to understand people? It comes down to one sentence, right? Invest in getting enough of the right stories, because that's going to get the people at the table. That's going to have the best insights. It's going to surface more than we think we know. And we want to make sure that it resonates. And there's a lot of techniques to do that. We're happy to help people get those insights. Everyone at the table, Mag, Paula, myself, we're all really invested in doing these things. So with that, I say thanks, everyone. It was good to see you. Thank you, Mag. Thank you, Paula, for attending. Thank you, our audience, for hopping in. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Send us questions, and we look forward to addressing those when we can. Thanks, everyone.